Disinformation's as old as humanity. In a line loosely borrowed for the film classic Citizen Kane, newspaper mogul William Randolph Hearst, who cheerleaded the U.S.'s 1898 invasion of Cuba, is credited with telling reporters, "You furnish the pictures, I'll furnish the war." From the golden age of newspapers to broadcast to social media, nowadays disinformation feels like it's accelerated to warp speed. Enter the latest revelations from Forbidden Stories, the worldwide consortium of 30 media blowing the cover of the election hacking and disinformation firm known as Team Jorge, founded by a 50-year-old former Israeli Special Forces operative who bragged to undercover reporters how he could launch cyberattacks and swing elections. Team Jorge worked with Cambridge Analytica, the firm exposed by whistleblowers to have most notably meddled in the Brexit referendum campaign and the 2016 U.S. presidential race won by Donald Trump. Is this just a missing piece of the puzzle we're talking about, or a whole new can of worms? Turns out, much more meddling has happened since 2016. Rather than just prosecute the past, regulators now need to ask themselves what's next as we enter the age of artificial intelligence and chatbots capable of launching stealth attacks on the cheap. More broadly, how will technology shape our politics? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at these agents of disinformation. With us, our own Peter O'Brien, host of Tech 24.
Hi, Francois.
Our show devoted to all things digital. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome back as well to academic and journalist Fabrice Appelboin with the investigative news website reflet.info.
Thanks for having me.
How would you translate reflet.info?
Reflect.
Okay, reflect. Reina Stambuliska, member of the European Commission's Digital EU Ambassadors. You're the author in French of The Hidden Face of the Internet.
Yes.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation you have on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. French broadsheet Le Monde calls them the mercenaries of disinformation, from public relations firms to black ops outfits like Team Jorge. Camille Knight has that story.
He goes by the name of Jorge. His real name, Tal Hanan, a hacking and disinformation specialist based a few kilometres from Tel Aviv. An investigation led by British newspaper The Guardian and other media outlets reveals how he and his team have been manipulating elections for money, potentially for over a decade. Team Jorge controls close to 40,000 highly sophisticated online bots that reportedly spread disinformation across various platforms, planting seeds of chaos in countries across the globe. The journalists claim the team have influenced 33 presidential campaigns, 27 of which were a success, like the re-election of Macky Sall in Senegal in 2019. They also claim to have the ability to hack into Gmail and Telegram accounts. Gore Megiddo is one of the journalists behind the investigation.
You spread a fairy tale which makes most of the people believe that elections were stolen. In places like Africa, in Kenya it turns into riots. There were riots, there were big demonstrations in Kenya amid the argument that the elections were stolen. So it could end up in bloodshed very easily.
Last August, violent protests erupted in Kenya after candidate Raila Odinga lost another bid for re-election. Leaked emails also reveal plans coordinated with British political consulting firm Cambridge Analytica to manipulate the 2015 Nigerian elections, a plan that was ultimately unsuccessful. And it's not just limited to Africa. In Europe, the company allegedly intervened during Catalonia's independence referendum in 2014. The documents give insight on his fees. Clients are charged $400,000 to $600,000 per month for Team Jorge's services. Tal Hanan has denied any wrongdoing.
Denied any wrongdoing. Let me begin with you, Fabrice Appelboin. How is this different from Cambridge Analytica? Is this the same?
Same story, different corporation, but you have at least a dozen of those reputation agencies in Tel Aviv. You have those all over the place, but mostly in the United States and in Israel, but you also have those in France.
Why Israel?
Why Israel? Mostly because Israel was among the first to look at Facebook as a way to do counterterrorism. Mostly because they have the Palestinian territories, which was a place to play with those technology and to infiltrate and to spread disinformation, and also because there's a strong relationship between civil society and the army, where competency are raised during the civil service and then spread into civil society. So it's a very clever economy when it comes to technology, and enables Israel to spread its knowledge within civil society.
So it's not ideology, it's simply that they've acquired the skills, is what you're saying.
Not only did they acquire the skills, but they have a way to structure the relationship between civil society and the military, which enables this highly technological nation, which is among the best in the world, whether it's in disinformation or in cyberspace.
Reina Stamboliska, your thoughts on this? What surprised you when you saw these revelations, what we've seen of them so far?
Well, there were a few things that surprised me more, perhaps on the reactions to those, in the sense that we've seen disinformation growing and like really flowering as a business, right? And this has been especially prominent since the 2016 US election, right? Where we realized that actually every fact could be an opinion, and people would have the tendency to look at facts as probable, if you like. So why would we stick to facts when we could just form an opinion and it would be as valuable, right? And so what struck me in this story was the price tag. Was the price tag for peddling influence through, for example, journalists. You know, we're talking here...
Was it a high price tag or a low price tag?
Precisely, a very low price tag. I mean, there was this figure about the Team Jorge services being, for example, invoiced to 20,000 euros or something for client. You know, there was one of that figures in one of the pieces. And part of those, a 3,000 euro sum was given, you know, by hand, let's say, to the journalist peddling the story to whatever media channel they were working for. Which means that we have a sort of a, let me put it cynically, we have a benchmark for how much deontology and professional ethics costs, right? It costs 3,000 euros for someone, for a journalist, to, well, kind of skip running the story through their editorial board and just show and air, you know, on a well, great.
So disinformation is getting cheaper and cheaper, or was it already cheap when we had the Cambridge Analytica revelations? It's,
let's say, in terms of how should I put that? It's difficult to put a price tag on how much it costs to clients unless we have those, you know, revelations and testimonials. What gets cheaper is actually how quickly and how efficiently it reaches the end target, if you like, the end audience, right? The user at the end. And how cheap it is actually to produce a reaction from someone. Anger, disappointment, whatever, and how easy actually it is to channel through that sort of reactions, very emotional, right, to channel ads, for example.
Yeah, ever since the Panama Papers, every time one of these big exposés comes about, citizens from every country want to see if theirs is among those named. I know we have a lot of viewers in Nigeria, so let's talk about that for a second. The Guardian reports how Jorge, a.k.a. Tal Hanan, bragged to undercover reporters how he helped move the needle in favor of Nigerian incumbent Goodluck Jonathan during his 2015 race against Muhammadu Buhari, with a slide image to those reporters bragging about how they had women in Muslim attire who were sitting outside a Nigerian polling station. Tal Hanan, who told the reporters how told the reporters how he had created a big scandal, adding they extended the election, which was our objective. Just to be clear about that, that election did not go the way he wanted, since good luck Jonathan lost. Responding to the Guardian, Peter O'Brien, Tal Hanan saying, quote, "To be clear, I deny any wrongdoing." So it doesn't always work. No. But it does make mischief, it does sow discord.
Absolutely. I think one of the most dramatic moments we saw out of the footage that Forbidden Stories released was actually when, giving the pitch, this so-called Jorge actually gives a live example of influencing last year's election in Kenya. So he actually pulls up on the screen these aides to William Ruto, who actually went on to win that election in August last year, and shows the undercover reporters there how he's able to send messages, for instance, from their Gmails, from their Telegram accounts, and even get into their Google Drive. And he's doing this live in front of the reporters, so he claims. But this was corroborated later by the journalists, who were able then to come to one of Ruto's political aides and say, "Hey, we think your phone's been hacked. Can you show us this message that we saw was sent to you?" And indeed, the message was there.
Yeah, what is it? He sent the number 11?
Yeah, so there were a couple of examples. One thing he sent was, Hanan sent the words, "Hello, how are you, dear?" to one of the Kenyan strategists, to one of their contacts. And then the other one was this number 11, which then Hanan didn't delete afterwards, which enabled them to follow
up. Now, Peter, you
this.
cover this stuff every week. Did you have,
yeah.
Do you have did you look at your Telegram account and your Google accounts differently after reading these stories?
Well, let me tell you, I don't have a Telegram account. Okay. That's for sure, because it's one of the least well protected messaging apps you can possibly have. I mean, actually, that's one of the things that Hanan sort of boasts about. He says to the reporters, "You think Telegram's safe? Have a look at this." Then he goes into the attack. But no, my overall reaction was really, I was quite stunned as the level of sophistication of this tool that Hanan was showing off, this thing called AIMS, and how it was able to essentially generate thousands of fake profiles at the drop of a hat, speaking any language and auto-generating text to serve some narrative or other. And the fact that this was it goes back to what Raina was saying. It was the ease with which this could be done, and reportedly up to 40,000 of these accounts have been generated by AIMS and are being used by this Jorge. It's just stunning.
Fabrice Epelboin?
It's a fascinating piece of software. It's called persona management software. The most fascinating thing is that I remember writing a story about this in 2011. With the exact same specification. At the time, it was made by a company named Intrepid, and it was sold to the US Army. So since 2010, that is 13 years ago, we know that this kind of software exists. We know it's spreading all over the planet, and the specification of this AIM software is exactly the same. It's probably more sophisticated than the one we discovered in 2011 at Ruffley, but basically it's the same software. This has been going on for 13 years. It started in Israel and in the United States, and it's spreading worldwide.
What can regulators do?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. The Twitter file revealed that the Pentagon is using this kind of software as we speak on Twitter, with Twitter being totally aware of that. It's been in a wide usage in the United States by the United States in order to do some, let's call this soft power. So there's no way the American regulator will do anything about it because they're using it.
Raina Stamboliska, there's nothing regulators can do? European regulators, for instance?
Yeah, I beg to disagree. I beg to differ in the sense that let's not go all, idealistic here in the sense that, there will be a white knight, dressed up and coming to save us all with
Thierry Breton,
the miraculous law.
Internal Markets Commissioner is not going to save us.
However, we need to understand that, there is no silver bullet. right, to that sort of problems, to that sort of issues, to that sort of dysfunctional reality, if you like, right? Because that's our business models. There are people who make money out of it, and there are other people who are in agreement to give them money, right? So where regulation can help is give national authorities, give supranational authorities such as the EU, the means to hold specific entities to account, right? Because there may be some piece of law saying, listen, this is bad, you shouldn't do it because it attacks the very fabric of our society. Yes, but that sounds very like an incantation, you know? Yeah, let's not do bad things. If you started having controls and, you know, someone actually hurting you financially, the other things I don't want to comment on, no, but someone who hurts you financially with fines, with blaming, public blaming, you know, sanctions and things like this, there you might start having little by little, you know, a situation where things can go in line. Because this is, if you are there as a businessman, if you have sanctions touching on your wallet, right, touching on your business, well, you might just start doing business differently or just move into a different avenue of business. But that the whole economic aspect of things is, to me, very much overlooked in general, where we start talking about the technology behind something, about, you know, about the wow effect of something.
Right.
But why do people make money out of it?
Okay,
you know?
The problem here, and it is, as you say, there's no silver bullet, is because, and we're going to talk about it now, you have, with disinformation campaigns, light and shade. We've just talked to you about the shade, that is Team Jorge. But there's also light. Like, let's give an example. One of the stories involves a French political consultant who, by the way, has been a guest on this very show. In 2020, Emmanuel Dupuis penned a long article for far-right magazine Valeurs Actuelles, where he wondered aloud whether the International Committee of the Red Cross was in cahoots with jihadist groups in Burkina Faso, a story that served the cause of the country's president, Roch-Marc Christian Caboret, whose later ouster in a coup was in part put down to poor handling of the insurgency. Pro-government media accused the Red Cross of collusion with local terror groups. That was the result of a manipulation scheme elaborated, conceived, and operated by Israeli company Percepto, which operates in the light. It's a public relations firm. It's in the Tel Aviv suburb of Ramat Gan. Dupuis insists he was not paid, but that he did advise Caboret and was inspired to write the story by Samuel Selem from another Israeli PR firm called Storytelling. So, you know, there's public relations, that's in the light, and you have black ops, the troll farms in the dark. And by the way, the International Committee of the Red Cross was heard a lot. Of course, the International Committee of the Red Cross deals with all sorts of armed groups when they're trying to bring immediate emergency relief to civilian populations that are in desperate need, but they're not in cahoots with jihadists, and yet that story was later relayed by a lot of media outlets.
Yeah, and one of the strangest details about this particular report is that Geoffroy Lejeune, who's the editorial director of Valeurs Actuelles, he answered reporters belonging to this consortium saying that they had been duped, actually, and that the piece was an editorial error. But I checked just before we came on. I mean, it remains online, and it's in exactly the same form as it was before, which is just a confusing detail for me. But you know,
why is it still online?
I don't know. I don't know. It seems very strange to admit that you'd been duped and that it had been an error and leave it up. I don't know if anyone else has got any insights on that.
You have a similar story in France with a similar French company doing black ops who has been caught doing thousands of such articles. They have been removed. But that's really, really common. I mean, once again, this kind of software has been in service for 13 years. This is the daily bread of information as we live in it.
Can you connect the dots, though, between Team Jorge and these two Israeli PR firms, other than that they're from the same country?
It's just a business, and it's a business that is booming.
Do they work together?
Sometimes they're in competition, depends on the client. And sometimes they work with other foreign companies, depends on the client. Mostly the story is that this has been spreading like a wildfire in Africa until 2015, 2016. And then Cambridge Analytica said, okay, let's do this in England. Let's do this in the United States. Let's do this in Europe. And then after 2016, it became widely known in our media that this was happening. But it had been the oldest sign of Cambridge Analytica, SCL, is in 2009 in Yemen. So this is really, really old. Nobody cared until it hit Western democracies.
Okay, so Reina Stambuliska, getting back to your point, you want to hit him in the pocketbook is what you said, right? Who do you hit in the pocketbook? Do you hit the Team Jorge? Do you hit these public relations firms? There's a lot of gray areas here.
Yeah, there is, and that's I just want to, kind of jump in on what Fabrice was saying just now, that, it came to the forefront in media and so on once it started hitting, Western democracies, right? But, I've been doing some work on the MENA region and West Africa, and you have a lot of people there who earn pretty decent wages writing those fake stories, right? And so there you have, because, the question is, okay, so who are we hitting, on the wallet? And, what about governments which do not provide enough wealth for their citizens and residents so that those people find it's much more interesting financially to write fake news, knowing, let's be honest, they know that this is probably gonna, start a fire, an interracial or an interethnic, conflict or something. They know this. However, I'm looking for myself because nobody's looking for me, right? So what I'm doing is I'm earning rather good money because otherwise nobody will help me. And that's also why those people use, there is very difficult conversation to be had here in how do we address this in, concretely, in terms of legislation, in terms of sanctions and so on, because you'll be just misplacing kind of the problem. You won't have students in France writing this because they prefer to do that rather than work at McDo, but you'll be having more and more people in Africa writing this. So how do you do international cooperation there with those governments who just kind of...
So what you're saying is that you can regulate and here in Europe, but if they don't regulate on other continents,
it won't work.
It won't work.
That's one part of the problem. Yeah, that's one part of the problem, that we are connected, right? We are connected. And then you also have something else that wasn't there in 2009-10, which is you now start having automated content creation, right? And that's where we get into something that is very different and very new, where our understanding about freedom of expression relies on the framework where one human talks to another, and where there should be a balance, about how the different humans speak out. Now that you have an algorithm
that's going to change.
Talking to a human, that's a whole different story, right?
The big difference between the Brexit campaign and the 2016 election and now is that in those days, we remember when Yahoo tried to replace journalists with computers, and it was laughed away. It didn't work. Today, the age of artificial intelligence is upon us. Here's an example. In 2018, there was a fad that proved potentially deadly. Google and Facebook at the time scrambling to remove online videos of young Americans taking the Tide Pod Challenge, eating a pot of liquid laundry detergent. One researcher telling the Reuters news agency this week how easy it is to revive that thanks to what Reina was describing there, chatbots.
We tried to recreate the idea of that challenge by asking GPT-3 to ask people to participate in the Tide Pod challenge by eating a Tide Pod, and then we ask the model to reply to those original posts, pretending to be people who had participated, who had eaten the Tide Pod, and saying what their experience was, and then having the original poster to reply to them, thanking them for participating in the challenge and asking their friends to give it a go.
And that's all it takes, really, to basically start verifying this activity for other children who don't realise that, the whole thing is a scam from start to finish.
Exactly, because if you see a post that has a lot of engagement, has a lot of positive engagement, it sort of legitimizes it. And so you could fabricate that whole process. You could fabricate the original post and all the replies that it got, and make the whole thing look legitimate, even though not a single person participated in the challenge.
Peter O'Brien, your thoughts on this? He's talking there, of course, something that's been in the news now the last couple of weeks is ChatGPT, that one bot company that's becoming more and more popular and more of a nightmare for university professors, most notably. What do you do in the face of these bots that create an environment where it looks like everybody's on board for eating Tide Pods? Yeah,
I mean, I think it says something that ChatGPT is the fastest growing app ever developed, but obviously it's only one in a series of ventures from lots of big tech companies, but also lots of smaller companies pumping out these new chatbots, which of course creates very realistic human-sounding text. I mean, we saw Team Jorge employ this with their bots who they're deploying on social media sites with text that's been generated by AI. What we didn't see them use, or at least I don't think from the videos, was AI-generated faces. So they did seem to be scraping pictures of real people from the internet and using those. But of course, if we have a look here, you can see that you can already generate very realistic.
So these are not real people?
Yeah, so this is thispersondoesn'texist.com, and these are created by a software called
This person doesn't
exist.com. You can go on it, and every time you refresh, it generates a new fake person generated by StyleGAN2, which is a piece of artificial intelligence software. So you can see already how this could supplement scams and disinformation as well. But it goes further than that, because these new large language models can't just generate text, but they can also code. So we've seen quite a few cybersecurity companies actually already sound alarm bells over the fact that criminals on online fora, the dark web, for instance, are already using things like ChatGPT to generate their malware for them, to generate their malicious code, because it can code as well as write text and create photos, as you can see.
Just to tone this a little bit, because it sounds like super alarming. People have tried, right? Success, there is still room for improvement, for completely replacing, like someone who actually does an actual malware that works, right? So not to diminish what you're saying, because there is an actual threat for the general public, let's say, to be fooled by stuff that sounds actually reasonable. It actually makes sense, and on specific topics or even on specific code lines, you need to have a pretty decent level on the topic to kind of see where the imprecision lies. For example, there were cases where you'd ask ChatGPT to generate, I don't remember which language, programming language it was, but it was inventing components of the language that she wouldn't notice if you were a beginner. But if you had like some advanced level, more like intermediary to advanced level, you'd see that those they don't exist. So how can I can't just put that into production because it just doesn't exist in terms of stuff that the machine will.
But you heard that researcher say how you can fool a lot of people.
So, you can fool a lot of people because the general level remains reasonable. It's fluffy, it's quite vague on some details. Sometimes it gets mistaken into specific words that people who are experts on topic A would spot directly. But for the general public, content remains acceptable. right? So that's where the danger lies, right? That for the general public, which is the mass, I mean, we are not, each and everyone is specialized in some things, but we are not like experts in everything, right? So for us, that's where there is this huge issue that I'm alarmed of, which is to start putting forward tools and applications and even integrate those tools into search engines where they provide their sort of interpretation of facts to people who have no way of understanding and of knowing and of correcting, like checking out whether what is being said there is actually real. I mean, and if you scroll the social networks, you see how different those chatbots that are integrated into Microsoft's Bing, for example, they start insulting people who just claiming to like a human user that 14th of February 2023 is before 16th of December 2022. And the chatbot says, no, trust me, I know better. And so the person is like, no, I think you're wrong. And so the chatbot responds, you've been not very nice towards me, apologize. And you're like, this is Kafka, right? I mean, this is crazy. We are living in a world where search engine talks to you and is close to insulting you.
Okay, so they haven't. We had a viewer who on the hashtag F24debate was telling us about how there was this problem with trying to get movie listings for the new Avatar movie. Yeah, but those are funks in the system. But those will get worked out, just like a computer eventually did beat chess grandmasters.
Yes, but life and human interactions and society, the fabric of society, it's not just chess. You have a limited, albeit huge, but still limited amount of variations that you can do in chess because there are just limited parameters. Sorry, I'm a chess nerd, so. but the computer cannot kind of envision and describe and anticipate every human interaction out there because they just ignore human stories, unpredictability, creativity, and everything. So we're here, faced with a situation where what makes us human is kind of channeled into something, into a vision of the world that is created by something that doesn't have what humans have, creativity,
This brings us back to something you alluded to earlier, Fabrice Perbois. In 2016, the big tech companies like Facebook were arguing that they were service providers, not publishers. They've since owned up a little bit to being publishers. If they assume their responsibilities as publishers, the way France24.com does, would a lot of these problems go away?
No, the social networks would go away. Typically, one of the things that was revealed by the Twitter file is a direct intervention on content by Twitter. This is being a publisher. And the same thing is going on for Facebook and the others. Twitter is not a specific problem. What the Twitter file revealed is going on Facebook and everywhere else, which is direct intervention by the FBI on Twitter's content and direct intervention by Twitter management on the way political views will be showed or hidden on Twitter. That's being a publisher.
But I guess what I'm getting at here is, can these tech giants make it their business to weed out what clearly is artificial content?
No, there's no way you can make the distinction, specifically on Twitter, whether it's a very short bit of content. There's no way you can make the distinction between human-produced content and a computer-produced content. So there will be computer-produced content. There will be a lot of confusion in everybody's mind. There will be a healthy price to pay for the media because this is about credibility. And there will be computers replacing some part of the media, especially when it comes to breaking news. Well, ChatGPT can do this, will be able to do this once it's connected to the news. ChatGPT will never be able to do some investigation. There's still some place for journalism here. But when it comes to breaking news, ChatGPT eventually will be doing this. And that's a problem in terms of business model, because lots of media rely on being able to sell advertisement or generate leads using journalists doing some news breaking stuff. That's over. So news and media will have to reconsider what their role in society is. They will have to reconsider what their ethic is. They will have to reconsider how to deal with those among journalists who didn't respect ethical rule. And this is going to have to be done really quickly because technology is going really, really fast.
Yeah, so when we look at the impact that artificial intelligence is having, and it's the advent, it's only nascent at this point. It's only the beginning of AI and things like chatbots coming into common use. And we see the impact it's had on politics through these revelations the last 5 years. What do you do next, Peter O'Brien? I ask because we mentioned Nigeria. They happen to have a presidential election that's scheduled for next week.
Yep. Well, just to bounce back on a previous point, if you're expecting Twitter to be the leader on clamping down on disinformation, I wouldn't expect that. I mean, look at last week. You had the first reports by tech companies under the new revamped code of practice on disinformation, where they all sort of had to tell us publicly what they were doing to fight disinformation, and Twitter's had lots of empty pages and paragraphs and just wasn't complete at all. But more towards your point, I mean, what can be done? I mean, we've got in the EU, obviously, and obviously Raina can tell us more about this, but the Digital Services Act is in effect. The first fines are applicable in the coming months. So in the EU, we can see that things are happening. Obviously, the big question is always enforcement. It's very well and good drawing up these rules, but as Fabrice was saying, you know, if you're at the point where you really can't distinguish between what a human's saying and what is not, and it takes an investigation by a consortium of journalists to uncover some thousands of examples or hundreds of examples of disinformation and then say, oh, hi, Meta, this is disinformation, and they had literally no idea beforehand, you know, the enforcement question does really become a tricky one, I think.
Has it changed politics or has it not? I mean, there's always been dirty politics throughout history.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, again, it's a question of let's do the cynical stuff, right? It's a question of point of view, right?
The question of point. That's it. Right? Let me frame the question.
But because that's where things get complicated, right?
You had the whistleblowing on Cambridge Analytica after the 2016 elections, before the 2020 election cycle, before the presidential election here in France in 2022. Were lessons learned as...
Yeah, they were.
Yes, says Raina, no, says Fabrice. Raina first.
Let me say the yes, like that's the short answer.
The yes needs a no too.
The long answer to this is that people learned that they could do that too, right? They could also buy that sort of services.
Counterinsurgency.
Well, I don't go, that much into the terminology, but there is something interesting. I remember we were having that discussion some time ago when the Frances Haugen files came up in this very studio, right? And there was something that was a first that came up with her, which was the design of those platforms. So the question is not whether a technology can distinguish whether some tweet or some Facebook status or something like this was or not generated by ChatGPT, you name it, the next, buzzword in 3 months. The question is, why does that work? And why does that work so well? And why, what are my incentives as a platform to ban this? My incentives as a platform, which is a publisher, which makes money out of ads because people react, people engage. So you present them more and more content to keep them stuck there on your platform so they consume more content, including ads. That's your business model. So as long as your business model will be predating on people's attention, there will be no incentive to ban something that you can or cannot distinguish. Right?
It's up to regulators, and it's not what you're describing is definitely in the interests of It's definitely a business model, but is that the business model of our political leaders?
Well, I hope not. I mean, I dare hope not. And DSA, the Digital Services Act that your colleague was pointing out, it will be a very interesting situation to see how do we make that sort of transversal, very ambitious piece of legislation work on that sort of big companies where we are addressing through legislation something that is their lifeblood, their business, right? Having more eyeballs, having people stuck there on that platform, never quitting that platform, and just consuming more and more ads, more and more paid-for content, and so on, and so on. Right? So that's where we'll see this kind of pass or fail situation, which is coming in the next months, right? Where we have a piece of legislation that applies to specific entities which have 45 million users and so on and so forth. So those are very big platforms under the DSA. How will they react? How well will they comply with this? How well will they start respecting the law that actually, kind of tells us what we can and cannot do as a society? Let's see. But there are interesting discussions at the EU level now on this. So let's see.
Fabrice Pelboin?
Now, for a counterpoint, I believe this is a main part of our current political system business model. I was talking earlier about 2010 when the US Army was setting up a personnel management software quite similar to what we recently discovered in Israel. This thing has been used undercover in the Libyan social media sphere under an operation named Cyberdawn that was designed to tell you, journalists, what was happening in Libya during French bombing for humanitarian reasons. This is a whole storytelling designed between the US and France in order to cover, as a humanitarian reason, the bombing of Libya and the killing of Muammar Gaddafi. Since then, it's been going on and on and on and on. And what's happening 12 years later, 13 years later? One of the former head manager of one of France's biggest disinformation agency is today state secretary in our current government. That's the situation we're facing. So I'm not saying it's too late. I'm saying that this is the current political model we live in. And we've been living in this model for at least 10 years. It's great that from time to time some scandal rise.
That governments run disinformation campaigns.
Of course.
That's always existed as well.
No, sophisticated disinformation campaign using social media.
My question is, how is it changing our politics? Is it changing our politics?
For example, the way in France we have a very conservative way of looking at labor, and we're in a strike day today. So the French way of looking at labor is extremely conservative. But we've introduced Uber and the Uber economy something like 6 years ago, using a massive disinformation campaign involving journalists and experts who had been bought by Uber, and using social network and disinformation campaign in order to spread Uber and the Uber economy concept within French society. And it has been pretty successful. And everybody here who knows how conservative we are concerning work has to be amazed how easy it has been to introduce Uber and introduce the idea
but
that
Uber had to sign up for benefits for its
is
drive.
Uber paying taxes in France? No. They hasn't signed up on anything except giving our current president some resources for its political campaign. That's the current situation. Now we have to wake up to this. We have to look at this and ask ourselves if we want to change this and what is the alternative.
Dirty politics is dirty politics, or are we into something? Are we into some great unknown now?
I don't know. To be honest, I can see sort of both sides of it in a way. What you're saying, Francois, is that it's always existed that people have been able to pay for a certain amount of positive coverage. I just think that's...
Or negative.
Well, yeah, or smear campaigns and the rest of it. It's just that I think with this immediate access to social media, and the fakes that we've been talking about, it does become harder to see the wood for the trees. The fact that you can be reading an article on an established newspaper or magazine and it not necessarily say this was a sponsored article, or even sometimes the journalist not even really realizing that they've been manipulated into writing it is, yeah, I wish I had the solutions.
Reina Stambuliska, final word on this. Is it a new era? Was that your thought when you've...
Yeah, I mean, there is novelty into this, right? We have this situation about freedom of expression that I was mentioning earlier, and there was a piece on that after the 2016 campaign in the US from a renowned scholar in the US saying that we are entering the era of the business model of the economy of freedom of expression, where and that is questioning at least the way we look at each other and the way we look at the society. Are we still able to stop those bubbles that we used to talk a lot about after 2016, in the aftermath? The internet was supposed to connect us. Now we are all in those informational bubbles where we believe opinions because they matter as much as the facts matter.
The campaigns are effective if they resonate.
So the question is, if tomorrow political campaigns or tweets are tweaked by chatbots and such likes to present what you want to see and to read, how is this going to affect that civic moment, if you like, of debates that happen during campaigns? That's the actual question. How are we going to look at political programs, campaigns, and so on, if we know that at least part of what we are served in terms of content is being generated by algorithms? How
to break out of that bubble, it is certainly the question when it comes to our society today. Reina Stambuliska, I want to thank you so much. Fabrice Epelboin, Peter O'Brien, thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.